My husband's sister whispered to my son that I didn't love him when I found out. I took everything and walked away. My husband David and I have been married for the past 8 years. We have a 4-year-old son named Tom. He's a playful, energetic little boy with a wildly active imagination. Tom has always been very close to me, definitely a bit of a mama's boy, which I don't mind at all. I know that once he becomes a teenager, he'll start developing his own interests and may not want to spend as much time with me. David and I are a great team. Over the years, we've built a smooth routine for managing the house, raising Tom, and still thriving in our own careers. Honestly, the balance we've found in our lives is something I've always credited to having a respectful and communicative husband like David. So you might think I have nothing to complain about here on Reddit, right? Well, the reason I'm posting today is because of my husband's sister, Kathy. Now, I don't want to come off as immediately biased, but let's just say Kathy has always been extremely hard to get along with. She's been cold and distant toward me since the very beginning, and that attitude hasn't changed even after all these years of marriage. I remember when David and I first started dating, he mentioned that while his parents would likely accept me easily, his sister Kathy would probably give me a hard time. He said she had always been very protective of him. Turns out, he was spot on. The first time I met her, Kathy bombarded me with questions about my family, my childhood, my siblings. No matter how I answered, she seemed unimpressed, her nose practically stuck in the air the whole time. To make things worse, she kept randomly bringing up David's exes during the conversation and comparing them to me, as if that was a totally normal thing to do. At one point during dinner, she even invited David to join her and her friends on a girls' trip, saying he needed to clear his head before getting serious with someone. That comment really threw me off. I was visibly upset, and David noticed. He told Kathy to back off, but did so in the most polite, non-confrontational way possible. That's something that sometimes frustrates me about David. While he does speak up for me, he isn't firm about his boundaries when it comes to Kathy. He cares deeply for her, and I think she knows that and uses it to her advantage. She acts like as the older sister. She has the final say in what's best for him. Since that first dinner, it's been pretty clear to me that Kathy and I just don't like each other. And while that stung a bit at first, I wasn't about to bend over backward to win the approval of someone who had already made up her mind about me. Still, I've always tried to be polite when we cross paths, but she never makes it easy. One moment that really stands out in my mind is from David's grandparents' anniversary party. The whole family had been invited, and I came along as David's +1. We'd been dating for a year by that time. Throughout the evening, many of his relatives came up to chat with me. I genuinely enjoyed how kind and easygoing they were. The only person who didn't say a word or even greet me was Kathy. I noticed it, and chose to steer clear of her. Later in the evening, David's grandparents asked everyone to gather for a big group photo. As we all came together, Kathy suddenly singled me out and told me to step out of the frame. David looked at her, stunned, as she loudly said that he might break up with me someday. And she didn't want one of her brother's bimbos in a cherished Spoo's family picture. My cheeks burned with embarrassment as everyone around us grew uncomfortable. David tried to defend me, but Kathy kept interrupting him, insisting that I was just a random stranger and shouldn't have even attended the event. That was the final straw. I was mortified. David had been welcomed at every one of my family's gatherings, and not once had anyone treated him the way Kathy treated me. I quietly excused myself, walked back into the house, and started looking for my car keys. I had no intention of staying another minute around that woman. David and his parents came rushing after me, trying to apologize. His mother pleaded with me to come back with them, but the moment had already been ruined. I could hear David's grandparents scolding Kathy loudly, which only made me feel more guilty, like I had ruined everyone's day. I left right away, and that night seriously considered breaking up with David. I wasn't sure I could handle someone like his sister in my life. But to my surprise, David showed up at my place later that evening with flowers and pastries to apologize. He told me that everyone had called Kathy out for her behavior, and that he had even threatened to cut ties with her, which apparently made her break down in tears. He said he was getting tired of her constant drama and didn't want her in his life anymore. We had a long conversation, and I felt reassured knowing he was willing to stand up for me. In the days that followed, David stayed true to his word. We completely stopped seeing Kathy, and he ignored her calls. She started showing up at his house without warning, so he had all the locks changed and asked his parents to talk to her, telling her to respect his personal space. His parents were fully supportive of his decision, and Kathy was left with no choice but to accept that her brother didn't want anything to do with her. We thought this might finally make her reflect and regret how she'd treated me, but instead, it had the opposite effect. She started calling and texting me, leaving threatening voicemails and blaming me for everything. The breaking point came when she showed up at my workplace one afternoon, demanding to see me. Thankfully, my manager stepped in and escorted her out. But the incident left me badly shaken. I told David that I had no choice anymore. I was going to break up with him, file harassment charges against Kathy, and take her to court. Hearing this, David broke down in tears, begging me not to end things. He pleaded for a chance to make things right and promised he would handle it. He then convinced his parents to arrange a meeting with Kathy at their home. It was there that they all had a final confrontation. His parents, already aware of everything she'd been doing, made it very clear they wanted no part in her toxic behavior. David and his parents warned her that her actions were borderline insane, and if she didn't stop, they would fully support me in taking legal action. Somehow, Kathy finally cracked. She admitted she needed help. She opened up about spiraling out of control and not knowing how to stop. She also confessed she had lost her job months ago and had been unemployed ever since, which had worsened her mental health. Thankfully, David's parents stepped up. They got her admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she could be properly monitored and treated. David made it clear he still didn't want any contact with her, and Kathy finally seemed to accept that. She sent me an apology text, not the most heartfelt one, in my opinion, but for her sake, I hoped she'd find healing. When David and I finally got married, we decided not to invite Kathy, even though she had been discharged and appeared to be doing better. I wanted no connection with her, and everyone respected that. She did send flowers to congratulate me on our wedding, which I appreciated. Right after we returned from our honeymoon, Kathy announced she was getting married. Everyone was shocked. No one even knew she'd been seeing anyone. Still, we were cautiously happy for her. Until we found out she was marrying a man she met during her psychiatric treatment. For context, this man James was a diagnosed schizophrenic with a history of alcoholism and violent behavior, according to his doctors. Naturally, David and Kathy's parents were concerned. Kathy announced that the wedding would take place the following month, and she specifically invited only David, not me. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I was relieved. It saved me the trouble of coming up with an excuse not to go. However, David was offended that his sister excluded me, so he chose not to attend either. Those who did go to the wedding later told us it had been a complete disaster. Kathy and James were apparently completely wasted during the ceremony and couldn't even keep it together. The fallout from that day weighed on all of us, but it hit her the hardest. When I saw her afterward, she hugged me so tightly it felt like she hadn't had a real human connection in years. She started sobbing into my shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. In that moment, I could feel every ounce of her pain, and for the first time, I didn't see her as the cruel sister-in-law who'd made my life miserable, but as a broken, scared woman who had been suffering in silence. David and I helped her to the couch, gave her some warm tea, and let her rest. She barely spoke for the rest of the night. She just stared at the TV without really watching it. That night, we let her sleep in our guest room. I stayed up late, thinking about everything that had happened over the years, wondering how someone so strong-willed had ended up so shattered. The next morning, Kathy was a little more responsive. She apologized for showing up unannounced and thanked us for taking her in. She admitted she had nowhere else to go and that she had finally realized James would never change. She told us how he had grown increasingly paranoid and aggressive, locking her in the house, going through her phone, controlling who she could talk to. She said she had finally gathered the courage to leave, but the miscarriage broke her in a way she didn't expect. David and I told her she could stay with us as long as she needed. His parents came over as soon as they heard what had happened, and they were just as shocked. Kathy didn't say much to them at first, but over time she started opening up. We encouraged her to go back to therapy, and thankfully she agreed. David helped her get in touch with a women's shelter organization that provided counseling and legal assistance for women in abusive relationships. It's been 8 months since then, and Kathy is still living with us. She's slowly getting better. She eats more, talks more, even laughs sometimes. She's seeing a therapist weekly and is now in the process of filing for divorce. There are still days when she locks herself in the room and cries for hours. But we don't push her. Healing takes time, and we're just glad she finally left that nightmare behind. Tom has taken a liking to her. He calls her Auntie Cat and often brings her his favorite toys or drawings. I think he senses that she needs love, and in his own little way, he's trying to give it. Kathy says he's the reason she smiles some days. Looking back, it's surreal to think about how things unfolded. Kathy and I have had one of the most toxic relationships I've ever experienced. And yet here we are under the same roof, trying to build something like a bond. I still have my guard up, of course. Trust doesn't come easy, especially after everything that's happened. But I'm learning to forgive, or at least, to let go of the anger. David and I are stronger than ever. What we went through with Kathy could have torn us apart, but instead, it brought us closer. We now have a deeper understanding of each other, a shared goal of protecting the people we love. And Kathy, well, she's on a path to healing. It's slow and messy, but it's happening. I don't know what the future holds for her or for us as a family, but for now, we're taking it one day at a time. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. I was sitting in the living room when I plugged in the memory card from one of the cameras into my laptop. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what I expected to see, maybe some awkward moments, or Kathy being a little too involved, but what I actually saw left me shaken. The footage began like any normal day. Kathy walked into the living room with Tom, helping him put away his toys, then sitting him down to read a story. But as the video progressed, I noticed her tone shift. She wasn't just reading. She was whispering things into his ear. At first, it was too soft to hear, but as she moved closer to the camera's range, her words became clear. She was telling my son that I didn't love him, that I was always too busy, that she was the only one who truly cared about him, that if he ever needed anything, he should come to her and not me. She even referred to herself as his real mommy at one point. My entire body went numb. I couldn't breathe. I immediately switched to the footage from the camera in Tom's room. In one clip, Kathy tucked him into bed and once again began whispering things, more of the same manipulation. She told him not to tell anyone what they talked about, especially not me. She promised him more toys, more outings, and treats if he kept their secrets. I snapped the laptop shut, shaking. David, who had been half watching from beside me, looked confused. I told him to sit down and then replayed the footage for him from the start. He sat in stunned silence, watching as his sister slowly unraveled before us on screen. He didn't speak for a long time, just kept staring with a hollow expression. Eventually, he stood up, walked out of the room, and went straight to his phone. I don't know who he called, probably his parents, but he spent over an hour pacing the hallway, muttering in disbelief, sometimes just going completely silent. Meanwhile, I checked on Tom. He was fast asleep, looking peaceful, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding outside his room. My heart broke, thinking about the confusion he must have been feeling. The hesitation in his eyes. The silence when I asked him about his day. It all made sense now. David finally returned and sat down next to me. His face was pale, his eyes red. He told me that we were cutting Kathy out of our lives for good this time. He would drive over to his parents' house the next morning and tell her to never come near our home or our child again. He would also speak to a lawyer about filing a restraining order if necessary. We sat in silence after that, both of us too emotionally drained to speak. My mind kept replaying Kathy's words to Tom. It wasn't just betrayal, it was emotional manipulation of an innocent child. I had been so willing to give her a second chance, to welcome her into our lives after everything she'd been through. But this crossed a line. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, or how Kathy will react when she learns we know. But I do know one thing. I will protect my son at all costs. No matter who the threat is, even if it's family. I was watching TV downstairs, so I went into my study to review the nanny cam footage, which also had audio. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Kathy was playing with Tom, laughing, and taking good care of him. She seemed like someone who genuinely enjoyed being around kids. But imagine my shock when I noticed her pull a book out of her purse, something I hadn't seen before. Normally, we keep a stack of age-appropriate children's books in Tom's room. But this one looked completely unfamiliar. She read the book to Tom just before his afternoon nap. As I listened closely, I realized the story was about adoption, about how sometimes a mother gives her child to another woman to raise. As Kathy continued reading, she started adding her own commentary. She told Tom that this was exactly why. She had left him in my care years ago because she wasn't ready to be a mother back then. My eyes widened in horror. She then told my child that no matter what happened, she would always be his real mother, and that nobody could ever love him more than she did. She kissed his forehead and tucked him in for his nap. My hands were trembling with anger. I finally understood why Tom had been acting so strangely around me. The emotional confusion and distance, it all made sense now. Kathy had been poisoning his mind with this delusional story for weeks, maybe even months, and my poor boy had been caught in the middle of it. Unsure what to believe, I wanted to march straight downstairs and scream at David, demanding that he never let his sister near our home again. But something held me back. I decided instead to take the next day off work so I could spend some alone time with my son and gently talk to him about what was going on. That morning, I called Kathy and told her she didn't need to come over to babysit. She immediately panicked, insisting that she loved being with Tom and didn't mind at all. But I stood my ground and told her firmly to back off. I wanted to spend the day with my child. David asked if I was feeling okay, and I just smiled and said I needed a little break. I took Tom to his favorite park, and we spent the whole day playing, eating pizza, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. I wanted him to feel safe, comfortable, and relaxed before I brought up the subject. Later, as we sat on the swings, I carefully asked him what he and his aunt usually talked about when they were alone. He grew quiet, instantly nervous. I gently reassured him that he wasn't in trouble at all, and that he could always talk to me about anything. That's when he finally opened up. He told me Kathy had been trying to convince him for weeks that she was his real mom. Even though he didn't quite believe it, she said it so many times that he started to feel scared. She told him I would leave him someday because only real mothers stay, and that made him terrified to ask me if it was true. He looked me in the eyes and said, "But I love you, Mommy. I don't want to go live with Aunt Kathy." My heart completely shattered. I stared at his tear-streaked face. He looked so small, so vulnerable. This wasn't the same happy, silly boy I knew. This was a child who had been emotionally manipulated and scared into silence. I knelt down, held his hands, and told him everything was going to be okay. I promised that we would get through this together and that I would always be there for him. I hugged him tightly, letting him cry into my shoulder, all while silently blaming myself for not noticing sooner. I had failed to protect him, and now I had to make it right. But then Tom said something that made my blood run cold. He looked at me and whispered, "Daddy already knows." Confused, I asked what he meant. He told me. I asked Daddy about it, and he said not to tell you. I froze. My heart dropped. That meant David had known what Kathy was doing. He had known she was manipulating our child. And he had chosen not to tell me. Worse, he had told our son to keep it a secret. I couldn't believe it. My own husband had protected his sister instead of standing up for our son, or even warning me. I knew right then I had to act. I couldn't leave my son in an environment where he felt unsure, scared, or unloved. I packed our bags quickly and called my parents. I told them I was coming over, and, if David asked, we'd just say I missed them and wanted to spend a few days there. Thankfully, my parents were incredibly supportive and didn't ask too many questions. They immediately told me to come as soon as I could, and once I arrived, I explained everything. They were just as shocked as I was about what Kathy had been saying to my son. David did call once he got home and realized the house was empty. I tried to sound as normal as possible, telling him I just needed a short break from the house and work. He sounded a bit suspicious, but I reassured him I'd only be staying at my parents' for a few days. Since we rarely fight, I don't think he thought much of it, even if my behavior seemed a little off. Right now, I'm so torn. I don't know what to do next or how I should even begin confronting this situation. Am I wrong for putting distance between myself and my husband's clearly unstable sister? Wow. I woke up this morning to over 600 comments under my post. I honestly can't believe how many people used Reddit and came across my story. I used all fake names, of course. So hopefully no one in David's family will realize it's about them. To those criticizing me for not speaking, to my husband before taking action, I hear you. But please understand, I absolutely would have talked to David first if my son hadn't already told me that he did talk to his father when it first happened. Call it mother's instinct. But the fact that David knew for weeks how differently Tom was acting and continued to gaslight me about it, that alone told me that confronting him wouldn't have led to anything helpful. More than anything, I needed to get my son out of that house and away from anyone who could mess with his mind. He's safe now. No one is feeding him lies. And for me, that's all that matters. Kathy has been trying to reach out constantly. She's sent dozens of messages saying she needs to see my son and that she misses him terribly. I've ignored every single one. But I've made a decision. I'm going to put an end to this for good at the upcoming family gathering at David's parents' house this weekend. The get-together had been planned weeks in advance by me, ironically, because David's grandparents are in town, and I thought it'd be nice to spend some time as a family. But given everything that's happened, I plan to use this opportunity to speak my truth and make sure Kathy never gets near my child again. I'm back with an update. I finally confronted David and Kathy, just as I had planned, during the family lunch. I was incredibly nervous, but I brought the nanny cam footage with me for evidence. I didn't want to argue or get emotionally, just wanted the facts to speak for themselves. During lunch, I calmly called out Kathy in front of everyone. She looked startled and tried to laugh it off like it was some kind of joke. That's when I pulled out my phone, opened the video, and played the part where she was telling my son she was his real mommy. You could see the color drain from her face. I didn't stop there. I sent the clip to the family group chat so everyone could watch for themselves. Her parents and grandparents were horrified. They looked at her like they didn't even recognize who she was. Then, I turned to David. I told him he had failed to protect our son. He looked crushed and tried to explain that he hadn't thought it was a big deal. He admitted he was torn. He didn't know whether to support his sister's recovery or tell me the truth, but in the end, he chose to stay silent. I told him that because of his silence, I no longer trusted him. I made it clear that I could not allow our son to grow up in an environment where his own father refused to protect him just to shield a mentally unstable sister. For the first time in a long while, I saw my husband cry. But I didn't waver. I meant every word I said. David's parents and grandparents apologized to me repeatedly. They promised they'd make sure Kathy stayed far away from Tom forever. Kathy sat there, completely humiliated, yet still didn't have the decency to apologize, not even once. David kept trying to defend his choices, but I stopped listening. I had said what I needed to say. I left the gathering soon after. I was done. I've seen some people are confused by my decision, so I just want to clarify, I'm planning to divorce my husband. I know many of you think I should give him a second chance, that he's a good man who just made a mistake. And honestly, I agree. David is a good man. However, just because someone is a good man doesn't automatically make him a good father. The fact that David and I rarely had issues between us doesn't change the reality he failed our son. When Tom came to him with his doubts and confusion, David should have put a stop to everything immediately. Instead, he chose to cover it up and gaslight me for weeks. That choice destroyed the trust both my son and I had in him. I had welcomed Kathy back into our lives with open arms. After everything she had gone through, I felt compassion for her, not just as a sister-in-law, but as a woman who had survived unimaginable trauma. I felt sorry for her, but in the end, she proved exactly why I had always felt uneasy around her. She hadn't changed at all. Yes, the abuse Kathy endured was horrifying, but that doesn't justify manipulating an innocent child. That doesn't mean my son should have to suffer because of her unresolved trauma. Kathy is a grown woman who has clearly struggled with mental health for years, but we all believed she was getting better. We were wrong. What truly broke me, though, wasn't just Kathy's actions, was David's. The fact that he would prioritize his sister's emotional well-being over our son's mental and emotional safety tells me everything I need to know. That alone is proof enough for me that he should not be around Tom. He had always been such a supportive husband. I trusted him with everything. But in this one defining moment when it truly mattered, he didn't choose us. He chose her. And that betrayal is something I can never forget. I made a vow to myself. Right then and there, I will protect my son at all costs. I will make sure he never has to question who truly loves him again. I'm confident that I can get full custody of Tom, especially if I present everything, including the family's mental health history, in court during the custody proceedings. I don't know what the future holds. But I do know this: my son comes first. Always.